In today's video, we're taking a look at some NHL goalie trade options for the Toronto Maple Leafs. We have information from Sportsnet that suggests they're looking at 4 goalies and are currently making some offers that are rejected at the moment. But could they revisit and try to make changes down the road? Plus, we also have some trade talk around the Seattle Kraken. We have news from the NHL waiver wire, including a claim from yesterday. We also have a potential suspension coming for Coyotes forward Jason Zucker. We should have news on the NHL All-Star Game as well as the 2026 World Junior location. All that and more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a variety of NHL news and some trade talk to take a look at today. First up, I want to start with news from the NHL waiver wire. Yesterday, we had a player on waivers, and that was Seattle Kraken Jacob Megna, and he's been claimed by the Chicago Blackhawks. Actually, yesterday, I did have Megna down on waivers in my notes, and I forgot to mention it in yesterday's video, and he was actually picked up. I honestly didn't think he would be, but the Blackhawks are a team that could certainly use some players right now, certainly battling some injuries, so makes sense that they would put in a claim here on a short-term contract player like Megna. Obviously, he's a player who's bounced around here a little bit, so he goes to Chicago, and today on waivers, we have LA Kings defenseman Toby Bjornfot. Bjornfot's appeared only in a handful of games so far this year between the NHL and AHL. The LA Kings are recalling defenseman Brandt Clark, who's really been playing pretty strong play in the minors, and this is how they're making the roster space available to do that. So Bjornfot's available on waivers. Hard to say if he'd be picked up or not. He's still fairly young, so it might be an intriguing option to some teams, but where he hasn't played a ton, I don't know that he will be. We'll find out tomorrow at 2 o'clock Eastern time if indeed he's picked up or will be able to be reassigned. We also have a hearing coming for Coyotes forward Jason Zucker. As I'm recording this video, we do not know the outcome of said hearing, although I do suspect him to be suspended. It's rare that you see a hearing and it's not followed up with a suspension. Now, Zucker doesn't have really much of any history behind him. What he's being called to player safety about is a boarding/interference is what they're calling it against Florida Panthers forward Nick Cousins. Right before Zucker came in and nailed Cousins from behind. They called it boarding because of the location, interference because he didn't have the puck. But Cousins had just kind of laid, I guess you could call it kind of a dirty, kind of dumb hit on, I believe it was Valimaki of the Coyotes that was there with him along the boards. Cousins has been kind of getting a reputation for himself around the league as being one of those kind of, dirty players. I mean, he doesn't necessarily do anything overly egregious at times, but it's just one of those things that I know it seems to be building reputation. I see all kinds of fan bases around the NHL complaining about the little things that they see Cousins do in a run of a game. So in this case, I know Zucker was just kind of, should he have nailed him from behind? No, probably not. That's certainly going to get you in trouble, but I think it's a case of him kind of sticking up for his teammate, although he should have probably gone about things a little bit differently. So it's likely going to land him in a couple of game suspension. I know there's a lot of fans who would like to see Cousins penalized as well. Cousins was fined. We did see that, but he wasn't called to player safety for any kind of suspension. So obviously, this is the case where a lot of people are kind of, thinking they got the wrong guy, so to speak. But what Zucker did as certainly retaliation to the other hit was, far and wide against the rules and will land you suspended most of the time. So be curious to see how this comes out. I wouldn't be completely shocked if the results are announced tonight, between now and the time this video makes it to YouTube, while I go through the editing and posting phase of the post-production. So we'll see. I know the hearing itself is this evening. We may not get the result tonight, though. We'll have to wait and see. We should be getting some news tomorrow from the NHL regarding the first 32 players selected to be in the NHL All-Star Game coming up next month in Toronto. Of course, there'll only one from each team that is selected by the league, and then the remaining players to fill out the roster will be done by fan voting. So we will get that news tomorrow. I'd certainly love to know what your thoughts and comments are around it. Leave some comments down below on who you think should be the representatives for each team as they go into the All-Star Game festivities here. According to Michael Russo, who covers the Minnesota Wild, beat writer for The Athletic, he has sources saying that Minnesota will be the successful bidder to host the 2026 World Junior Championship Tournament. Of course, this year's tournament's over in Gothenburg, Sweden. Next year, it's in Ottawa, Ontario. Canada does host this event quite a bit. It doesn't seem to make it to the U.S. very often. We did hear that there was basically down to 3 locations in the U.S. that were interested in hosting it, including Vegas and Seattle were the other teams, or other cities, sorry, not teams. Obviously, they'd be looking to use their NHL arenas as part of it, though. And Minnesota was in their mix as well. Of course, we know Minnesota's called the state of hockey. Certainly lots of passionate fans there. I think the tournament would do very well. There's lots of options of where the games could be played, so makes a lot of sense. We'll see. This has not been officially announced, but according to Russo sources, Minnesota is the successful candidate here. I believe all the locations that were kind of bidding for the right to host it did have representatives over in Sweden for the current tournament, trying to persuade their way into hosting it. So we'll see when this gets officially announced, but that's a great location. It'd be fun to have it back in the United States because it's been a little while. We also got news today that the Florida Panthers have extended Latvian defenseman Uvis Balinskis, who gets a 2-year contract extension at $850,000. He's been a nice find for them. He was an older European free agent who came over to play with Florida this year. I think it's 18 games that he's appeared in. Been a decent find, decent addition. That seems to be the way the Florida Panthers and Bill Zito, he seems to be able to find value type players and have good luck with them when they're in the Panthers organization. It seems to be a trend there, but he's been a nice find in a low-key, low-risk signing here by the Florida Panthers. A few other news and notes around the league when it comes to recalls and injuries. The Vancouver Canucks today recalled Linus Karlsson. I know Philip DiGiuseppe did leave last night's game against the Senators due to injury, so it could be to cover for his spot. The Rangers today recalled one of their top prospects in Brennan Hoffman. Be curious to see how he makes out. He certainly, I think, has a bright future in the Big Apple eventually once he gets a full-time spot. The Edmonton Oilers today activated Dylan Holloway, who had been a long-term injured reserve, and he's going to the American Hockey League to get some playing time in. The Oilers have been on quite a roll, playing a lot better here in the last 15 to 20 games, so obviously they don't want to mess too much with the chemistry in their lineup, and he needs to be able to play, so it makes more sense for him to go to the minors for right now, get some playing time in, and they'll try to figure out a way to integrate him back into the NHL lineup once they feel it's the appropriate time. And in Washington tonight, probably, like I said, it's probably going to be started before this video hits YouTube, but Max Pacioretty is making his Washington Capitals debut tonight. Pacioretty has had a really rough couple of years after back-to-back Achilles tendon injuries. Obviously missed the bulk of last year, came in late after sitting out several months recovering from the Achilles injury after he was with the Carolina Hurricanes, only played a handful of games, and he had the same injury again. So certainly I hope he has better luck this time around. I certainly hope he can avoid this injury. It's really been a disaster for him being able to stay healthy. These are significant injuries that take a long time to heal. I mean, in both cases, he missed over 6 months of action. The amount of hockey he's actually played in the last couple of years is a very low number of games. So hopefully he can be a good boost for the Capitals in the scoring department. We know he has good scoring touch. I know last year after he came back with the Hurricanes, he did score a few goals. Like, he looked good early on, and then the injury happened again. So hopefully he can have the same effect with the Capitals. I know they're certainly going to be in a tough battle to stay in the playoff hunt in that tough Metropolitan Division. There is rumors and speculation from NHL reporters and Bruins beat reporters that the Bruins and Jeremy Swayman are closing in on a contract extension. I know I heard Elliot Friedman make mention of this even before Christmas, saying that he expected them to get this done pretty quick, and it should be done hopefully in January. Now there's some more local Bruins reporters kind of echoing the same thing that they're starting to hear. There is belief that it could be done maybe even as early as the next week, within the next week. So we'll see where it goes. I haven't really heard any predictions on where the contract is going to land as far as term and dollars go, but definitely fair to say he's going to be getting a fairly substantial raise on his current contract. That's for sure. He's been extremely strong netminder for the Bruins and makes up a great tandem there with Linus Ullmark. I do wonder, though, where his AAV goes, if it'll have an effect on the future of them being able to keep both he and Ullmark. Be curious to see. There's been some trade talk in this past offseason around Ullmark, but hard to say where things go. The Bruins were, again, better than expected this year, and they just don't seem to be slowing down as much as everybody thinks they should be. So be curious to see how that affects the overall salary cap situation, where the AAV comes in, and we'll should know the answer to that question here in the very near future. Now, also, when it comes to the trade talk around the NHL, the fourthperiod.com and Dave Pagnotta is reporting that Seattle Kraken forward Jordan Eberle has certainly generated a fair bit of interest around the NHL. There's a lot of thought that he could be made available at the trade deadline. Eberle is on a pending UFA contract, so he's in the final year, soon to be expired. Not having a fantastic year. We know the Seattle Kraken definitely have taken a step back, and in year 2 of their existence last year, they took a big step forward, got into the playoffs, won a round. It was really everything going right. This year, they've had some steps back, certainly not having quite the success they had then. But they have played a lot better as of late. Their last stretch of games has been good. They're coming off a Winter Classic win against the Vegas Golden Knights, so I'm sure the team is probably optimistic about where it's heading. There's some thought that maybe the Kraken will want to keep him and may try to negotiate a contract extension before they decide to officially pull the trigger on a trade. But this year so far, Eberle, he's got a lot of experience, so I can see why as a deadline pickup there would be interest. But he only has 4 goals and 16 points. It's not like he's, lighting the world on fire here and is going to be a tremendous offensive gift for any team that picks him up. Be more of a depth option really for a lot of teams. He's still a decent player for sure, and I can see why there'd be interest in him. But given his cap hit and his point totals and production, there'll be interest for sure. I have no doubt a lot of teams have asked about him, but at this point, he's mostly probably a third liner on most teams, and I don't know if the Kraken are going to have to probably want him to take far less money to stay. I'm not really overly confident in a contract extension getting done in that case. It might be better for the team, as much as he's been decent for them, to maybe move on and try to find a different mix. We know last year they were one of the higher scoring teams in the NHL. They had a lot of players kind of just all coming together, hitting career highs at the same time. Shooting percentage was up. Things were going extremely well, and it was going to be. I knew it was going to be really, really hard and challenging for the team to duplicate that this year. And obviously, Eberle, like a lot of people's numbers, are certainly down. So be curious to see where that goes and if he actually is moved at the deadline. And in Toronto, we want to look at some goalie trade options. Of course, we've heard mention from Elliotte Friedman on the latest 32 Thoughts podcast that Brad Treliving was kind of shopping around for goaltending help and offering a late round pick. Actually, I believe it was more so in the Saturday Headline segment that Friedman was talking about this, but I believe he did touch on it on the podcast as well. Essentially, he said that, I know on the Saturday Headlines segment on Hockey Night in Canada, he said essentially that they were offering later round picks for a different number of veteran goaltenders, trying to bring in somebody to stabilize things with Joseph Woll out on a longer term injury, and Ilya Samsonov just not getting the job done and having to go down to the minors. They really don't know when they're going to get either goaltender back. Marty Jones has been good for them, but he could certainly use some help. And it's probably not fair to Dennis Hildeby to have to come up and put all this pressure on him, but that's really where they're at right now. They don't really have much of a choice unless they acquire another goaltender or until Joseph Woll comes back from injury, and that unfortunately looks like it's going to be a little while. So between the Elliotte Friedman comments and then the article in Sportsnet from Luke Fox, he kind of outlines 4 goaltenders that they believe Elliotte Friedman is referring to that Brad Treliving was making an attempt to acquire. It sounds like he's kind of hoping that teams were in desperate situations to move a goaltender and therefore going to get them on the cheap. That's kind of where Treliving's head was at, and I don't blame him for trying that. Obviously, the Maple Leafs don't have a ton of assets they can give up, which makes acquiring a goaltender that much more challenging. But the 4 goaltenders that were rumored to be part of this mix include Jake Allen in Montreal, Anton Forsberg in Ottawa, Dan Vladar in Calgary, and Eric Comrie in Buffalo. That appears to be the 4 goaltenders, or at least speculated, that GM Brad Treliving checked in on and at least offered a late round pick to take them off their hands. Now, obviously, short term wise, from a cap perspective, you have to look at the numbers and see if would this really work? Can this be a fit? All of them are struggling. So from that perspective, makes you wonder if the Leafs really should even do it. I mean, you take a look at Forsberg, Allen, and Vladar all have another year in their contract. Vladar being the cheapest at 2.2, Forsberg at 2.75, and Allen at 3.85. None of them have a save percentage over 900 right now. I think Jake Allen does. Sorry, Jake Allen's save percentage is slightly over 900. The Forsberg and Vladar, though, not so much. They're allowing 3 to 4 goals a game, or like closer to 4 on average. Eric Comrie, again, he's a pending UFA, so he's the cheapest in the sense of less term, but he's also making less money at $1.8 million. Again, somebody who's played limited NHL games this year and doesn't have very good results to show for it. Now, are all of these goaltenders better than their records show? That's probably fair to say. Are the decors in front of these teams kind of leaving them out to dry at times? That's probably fair as well. But at the same time, you need goaltenders to be your best penalty killers. You need goaltenders to be the kind of player who comes up for a big save when your decor might make a mistake. And these guys, for the most part, outside of maybe a little bit from Jake Allen, they're not getting it done. They're just not. So to me, it's a risky acquisition if you're Brad Treliving in the Toronto Maple Leafs. I wouldn't probably acquire anybody outside of maybe Jake Allen with term. I just think it comes with too much risk. Jake has a little bit more of a longer history in the list of being like more of a steady netminder, whereas Vladar doesn't have that built up into his portfolio yet, and Anton Forsberg in Ottawa has been very much hot and cold really for the bulk of his career. Eric Comrie, not a ton of games and experience under his belt for his age, and the performance has certainly been, so-so at best. Is a really great... So it makes sense to me why the offer was low. Now, the report from Elliot Friedman on Saturday Headline said that any of these teams they're open to trading these guys, but they didn't want the late round draft pick. They would prefer a prospect in return. So they wanted a different kind of package. And Treliving doesn't really have a whole lot in the way of prospects to move. They're younger players like Robertson and Nyes, they're kind of fall into that category, kind of, but not really. I mean, they've been playing more in the NHL, so are they really prospects anymore, or are they just young NHL players? Either way, I know they don't want to part with them. That's fair to say. And at the same time, if you take a look at the rest of their prospects, there's probably not a lot there that's really all that interesting. I mean, they might be willing to move Bobby McMahon for the right price, but again, he's older. So he's not really a true prospect in that sense, being in his later 20s. So it's complicated. I mean, the Leafs do have a few interesting players. There's no doubt they do. But I don't think they're going to want to trade Fraser Minton. I don't think they're going to want to trade Easton Cowan. But those are going to be the players that those teams are probably asking about. They don't feel like they're desperate enough to accept a late round pick. It's just that simple, especially if the Maple Leafs, and they would need them to retain money on the contract. That comes at a price tag. It's not going to get a late round pick done. I mean, I guess there is a value in a price tag on cap space, but at the same time, it's difficult to say what the best option here is, or if there really is a best option. I don't know. I think if I'm Brad Treliving in the Toronto Maple Leafs, before I really try hard and kind of seal the deal in a trade, I think I'm going to have to test Hildeby a little bit to see in a game or two how he can do and how long they can go with him and Jones until Wall comes back. The problem with Joseph Wall, though, in his career, he's had a lot of injuries, and even if he comes back, is it going to happen again? He needs some insurance, and if you can't trust Samsonov, are you comfortable going into the playoffs with Marty Jones as your number one in case Wall's hurt? I don't know that you are. You need to have a solid tandem. So it makes sense why a guy with experience would make the most sense here for Montreal. That's why from that perspective, I'd say Jake Allen makes the most sense. But from my age and money perspective, I'd say probably Dan Vladar makes the most sense. But there's also other goalies around the NHL that could maybe make more sense for them. Like there's Kakinen in San Jose is an interesting one. I don't know if the Coyotes are willing to move Vejmelka. That's an option one. Interesting option too. And then there's other options too. If Detroit can get healthy, would they move? I don't know if James Reimer. I know it's a nostalgia thing to go back to the Leafs. I don't know if that's the answer either. There's just not a ton of real great options. So to me, the main goaltender that's mentioned in any of it, and then we've talked about this before, and I don't know how it's going to work because he makes the most money. He's also an arrival. You don't see many Leaf cap trades, but Jake Allen to me makes the most sense from that perspective alone. A lot of these goalies are struggling, and you can make an argument that their decors in front of them are not helping them. And the way the Toronto Blue Line is built, I'm not convinced that they're going to get much more help, and they're going to be in the same boat. So you probably can expect a similar performance. So to me, there's not a lot of great options, and we'll have to wait and see where things go on that front. But if you're Brad True living in the Toronto Maple Leafs, you definitely want to proceed with caution. I understand why he's offering a late round pick. Unless you can get him for dirt cheap, you're probably not willing to really make the deal because you think there's too much risk involved from your perspective. So let me know your thoughts on all today's news and rumors down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, of course, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the news and rumors from around the entire NHL. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.